Right. Hello, welcome to Club Book with Michelle Zauner. My name is Kaylin Creason. I'm a librarian at Washington County Libraries, and I'm here to moderate Club Book today. So, before I introduce our author, Michelle, properly, let me tell you a bit about the unique series bringing her to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Washington County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookshelf Red Balloon Bookshop. If you want to purchase Michelle's book, a link is available in the comments section of this live feed stream. Have it shipped, picked up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're in the area. Last housekeeping note, also in the comments, you'll see a survey link. Melsa would appreciate it if you could fill that out. It's really quick and easy, and we do listen to your feedback. Without further ado, Michelle Zauner is a darling of the modern indie music scene, better known by fans under her solo project alias Japanese Breakfast. Zauner's family moved to the US from South Korea when she was just 9 months old. She spent her formative years as one of only a handful of Asian American students in her Eugene, Oregon neighborhood and school, Oregon. The young songwriter grappled with her own sense of Koreanness then and continued her journey of self-discovery while attending college and finding her footing in the East Coast music scene. Zauner fronted the Philadelphia-based rock band Little Big League from 2011 to 2014 before her mother's unexpected cancer diagnosis compelled her to return home to Oregon. During this time, Zauner began to compose and record solo music, including the acclaimed album Psychopomp. She shared her story in 2018 in a viral New Yorker essay. Zauner's unflinching book-length memoir titled Crying in Hmart hit shelves a week ago today. Yay! After a short presentation by Zauner, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Some of you have already submitted your questions. Thanks very much. But if you have a question while she's reading or while we're talking, simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook and our tech manager will send them to me. If you prefer to ask something a little more anonymously, you can also email clubbookmn@gmail.com or send a private message on Facebook to Club Book. So if Michelle is ready, hello!
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I believe you're going to start today with a reading from your debut memoir, Crying in Hmart.
Yes.
Floor.
All right. This passage is towards the end of the book. It's during my honeymoon in Seoul when I'm visiting my Aunt Nami and her husband, my Aunt Nami was my mother's older sister. On our final night in Seoul, Nami and Imobu took us to Samwon Garden, a fancy barbecue spot in Apgujeong, a neighborhood my mom once described as the Beverly Hills of Seoul. We entered through the beautiful courtyard garden, its two man-made waterfalls flowing under rustic stone bridges and feeding the koi pond. Inside the dining room were heavy stone-top tables, each equipped with a hardwood charcoal grill. Nami slipped the waitress 20,000 won, and our table quickly filled with the most exquisite banchan. Sweet pumpkin salad, gelatinous mung bean jelly topped with sesame seeds and scallions, steamed egg custard, delicate bowls of nabak kimchi, wilted cabbage and radish, and salty rose-colored water. We finished the meal with naengmyeon, cold noodles you could order bibim mixed with gochujang, or mul served in a cold beef broth. I chose the latter. Me too, I like mul naengmyeon, Nami said. Your amma also. This is our family style. He is bibim. She pointed at Imobu. When the noodles arrived, she tapped her metal bowl with her spoon. This is Pyongyang style. She gestured back to Imobu's bowl. This is hamhung. Naengmyeon is a North Korean specialty, where the cold climate and mountainous terrain are better suited to furrows of buckwheat and root vegetables than the paddy fields of rice that line the rural river valleys further down the peninsula. Nami was referring to its two largest cities, Pyongyang, North Korea's capital, less than 200 miles from Seoul, and Hamhung, up the northeastern coast. Both styles of the cold noodle dish became popular in South Korea by way of northerners who fled during the Korean War, bringing their regional preferences with them. The leaders of the two Koreas, Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, would later share a bowl of mulnaengmyeon at the Inter-Korean Summit. It was the first time a North Korean leader had crossed the 38th parallel since the end of the war more than 60 years earlier, a historic event that prompted long lines for naengmyeon restaurants across the country, sparking a collective appetite for a dish seen as a promising symbol of peace. I tried to explain to Nami how much it meant to me to share food with her, to hear these stories, how I'd been trying to reconnect with memories of my mother through food, how Kay had made me feel like I wasn't a real Korean, what I was searching for when I cooked doenjang jjigae and jachuk on my own, the psychological undoing of what I felt had been my failure as a caretaker, the preservation of a culture that once felt so ingrained in me but now felt threatened. But I couldn't find the right words, and the sentences were too long and complicated for any translation app, so I quit halfway through and just reached for her hand, and the two of us went on slurping the cold noodles from the tart icy broth. Peter and I continued with our honeymoon. We visited Gwangjang Market in one of Seoul's oldest neighborhoods, squeezing past crowds of people threading through its covered alleys, a natural maze spontaneously joined and splintered over a century of accretion. We passed busy ajumas in aprons and rubber kitchen gloves, tossing knife-cut noodles in colossal bubbling pots for kalguksu, grabbing fistfuls of colorful namul from overbrimming bowls of bibimbap, standing over gurgling pools of hot oil, armed with metal spatulas in either hand, flipping the crispy side of stone-milled soybean pancakes. Metal containers full of chutgal, salt-fermented seafood banchan, affectionately known as rice thieves, because their intense salty flavor cries out for starchy neutral balance. Raw, pregnant crabs, floating belly up in soy sauce to show off the unctuous roe protruding from beneath their shells. Millions of minuscule, peach-colored krill, used for making kimchi or finishing hot soup with rice, and my family's favorite, crimson sacks of pollock roe, smothered in gochugaru, myeongnanchat. The pungent aroma reminded me of trips with my mother and her sisters to a high-end grocery on the basement floor of a department store in Myeongdong. An ajumma in a cloth hair wrap and matching apron would call out, "어서 오세요," an extended toothpick, skewered with different types of chutgal to try. The sisters would sample each and discuss, then have the winner wrapped in 50 layers of plastic until it was the size of a football for us to haul home. Sometimes mom would buy an extra suitcase just to bring it back to Eugene, and every time she served the roe with a side of rice at home, a tiny pool of sesame oil dribbled over top, I would close my eyes and hear my aunts in careful deliberation. From Seoul, Peter and I took a train south to Busan, South Korea's second largest city. A bottle of champagne was set out on the hotel bed with a note that read, "Mr. and Mrs. Michelle, congratulations on your wedding." It rained all 3 days we were there, but undeterred, we bathed in the rooftop pools of the luxurious hotel Nami had booked us as a wedding present, the cold rain creating ripples in the water as we looked out at the East Sea. We visited Jagalchi fish market, the rain still beating down on the beach umbrellas and tarp awnings that made up its patchwork roof, dripping down on red plastic basins and bright turquoise colanders filled with the bounty of the sea, spraying piles of cockles and scallops still enclosed in their ribbed shells, and long silvery beltfish hanging limply like neckties over a wooden pallet set out on the wet pavement. We brought back kue from the market and set our takeout containers out on the white hotel bedspread. We ate slices of whitefish sashimi, Korean style, freshly killed, still chewy, wrapped in red leaf lettuce and dipped in samjang and gochujang with vinegar, washing it down with big bottles of cloud and shots of chamisil. We flew to Jeju Island and hiked to Cheongjeon waterfall, watching the water spume into a clear rocky pool beneath. We walked steep roads along walls of black basalt, eating through a bag of fresh tangerines, then along the beaches where the water was still too cold to swim. We ate even more seafood. Nakji bokum, stir-fried octopus, meeuntang, spicy fish stew, and the Jeju specialty, black pig barbecue, wrapped in sesame leaves. Thick strips of samgyeopsal sizzled over hot coals, clinking stubbornly to the wire grill, as an ajumma came to cut it into bite-sized pieces with a pair of kitchen scissors. I thought of my mother and her butane burner, wearing a blue summer dress with straps that tied over her shoulders, cooking pork belly sam or grilling steaks and corn on the wooden deck that overlooked the property. When we finished, my father would collect our corn husks, and as was his habit, hurled them joyously over the railing and out onto the lawn as my mother audibly groaned, mourning the month she'd be forced to witness them slowly decompose below. "It's biodegradable," my father would bellow in defense, scanning the horizon, the firs and pines that rose out of the browning, sunburnt, grassy acreage. These were the places my mother had wanted to visit before she died, the places she'd wanted to take me to before our last trip to Korea was quarantined to a hospital ward, the last memories my mother had wanted to share with me, the source of the things she raised me to love, the taste she wanted me to remember, the feeling she wanted me to never forget. I think, oh.
I'm here, I promise. What are you gonna say?
Oh, just that you were on mute.
Yes, sorry, technical difficulties, everyone. Wow, you wrote a beautiful memoir, not only to your mother, but of the descriptive language you use is so lovely and evocative.
Thank you.
And I will say too, as a food memoir, it totally made me hungry.
Wonderful.
Great.
It served its purpose.
It served its purpose. I really want to go to an Hmart.
You should.
I should.
Is there one there in Washington County?
Not in Washington. Actually, someone told me the other day there might be, but can you super briefly tell us about Hmart and its meaning and what it is? And for those who haven't yet picked up the book, and you totally should, why should they go to an Hmart? What's Hmart?
Hmart is a grocery chain that specializes in Korean groceries, and there are usually one or a few in larger cities with larger Asian populations. And when I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, there actually wasn't an Hmart. My mom and I went to a different Asian supermarket, but I think it wasn't until, we started taking some trips up to Beaverton near Portland, and there was an Hmart there, and there was like a larger array of Korean groceries that my mother would delight in. And then the Hmart that I'm the most familiar with is the one in Upper Darby and in Cheltenham, which is outside of Philadelphia, where I went to college in Bryn Mawr. And my mother would always take me there to sort of stock up on shin cup ramen and microwavable bowls of rice. And, it was just her way of sort of making sure that I was cared for and leaving something behind for me. And it's become, such a place of refuge for me because it reminds me of my mother. And for my mother, it reminded her of her family. And, just like there, you can find a lot of ingredients that you can't find in regular sort of grocery stores. And so it's a lot of possibility for immigrants that maybe they can't find in other places.
That is so wonderful. It's so cool. I have a random food question tied to that a little bit, which is oh gosh, which one was it? Oh, so anyone who has read the book will know that Mongchi is a big influence on your Korean cooking. She's a Korean YouTube chef. Chef, is that the word?
She's a cook. She's a home cook. She's a vlogger.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so someone was wondering if you've had the opportunity to meet her yet.
I have. I've met her a few times. We actually just did a book event together a few days ago, and that was lovely. We made apple samjang together. But I met her first at 92nd Street. She did a Q&A with a chef in New York named Hooni Kim, who runs 2 Korean restaurants called Hanjan and Danji. And I had written this essay called Love, Loss, and Kimchi, which is the sort of seed of this idea even before Crying in Hmart, that was specifically about, my relationship with her and how her videos had sort of helped me through this really difficult time in my life. And it was called Love, Loss, and Kimchi. And this was before it had even been published. And I gave her the essay, and I forgot that my contact information was actually on top. And so when I won Glamour Magazine's Essay of the Year in 2016, she found out about it because I guess a lot of people were tagging her in it. And so she called me, and I was on tour at the time, and I got a call from an unknown number, and she's like, "Hi, it's Mangchi. Like, I'm so proud of you. I feel like your mom." And so we kind of kept in touch ever since then. We did a video together in a couple of years ago for Munchies, and then that was the day before my 30th birthday. And I told her, and so she invited me to her apartment, and I actually celebrated my 30th birthday at Mangchi's apartment, and she made bulgogi, and I got to try all her different banchan and her kimchi, and it was just a really, really sweet time. She's been extremely warm and generous to me, and I'm sure, she has so many fans that have had this like very, personal tie to her in so many different ways. There are a lot of Korean adoptees that have really felt close to her. There are a lot of people who've lost parents, or spouses of Korean people that are sort of like grasping at straws, and she's helped so many people in very personal ways, and she's so generous with her time. I'm very, very grateful to her.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And I know you said at one point, she said like, oh, I'm so proud. I feel like your mother. And with the recipes she shared with you and in sort of teaching you how to cook as you describe in your memoir, it does sound like she's had a little bit of somewhat of that role in a way, like it's a very beautiful thing, So what I'm curious, speaking of cooking, so in your memoir you talk about learning to cook several Korean dishes that you didn't have the chance to learn from your mom or your aunts. How is your cooking today? Like, I'm sure you finished the book a while back, but how is it? How do you feel today about your cooking skills?
Oh, I mean, I'm by no means like a chef, but I'm pretty good at making a few things, and yeah, I've certainly gotten a lot better over time, and feel a lot more confident than when I started. But it's something that I just really enjoy, and have for a long time, and so it's something I always am, you know, trying to get better at.
For sure. That's great. Okay, now back to, we've got food questions, we've got music questions, we've got book questions. I hope you're ready for all of it.
I'm ready for it all.
Awesome. Okay, first audience question we've got is, I've read and loved your essays. They said they've written some essays themselves, and so a memoir seems like a totally different beast entirely. They just want to know, what was your process like?
Yeah, it was a long process. I feel like for initially, I was lucky that in some ways that it sort of began as two separate essays. I did this glamour essay, and a lot of that sort of material and was repurposed, and it was sort of the seed of this whole idea. And then Crying in Hmart was, it actually, before, it was a standalone essay, it was always the first chapter of the book. And, it was a lot of free writing. And one thing that really helps me was I tried to write 1,000 words every day until I hit 90,000 words. And I just let a lot of really terrible writing come out, and a lot of, a lot of free thinking to happen, and a lot of memory, and that was helpful for conjuring a lot of these memories. And there was outlining, and yeah, just years and years of writing and revision. And it happened in stages. And I remember, like, before I wrote this book, like, seeing a lot of authors talk about the writing process in this way that was sort of cryptic, and now I totally get it, because it's such a haphazard process. There's no really great answer beyond that, of just like, I just showed up every day for a while, and something eventually formed, and it was definitely wonderful to have a spectacular editor, and my husband was definitely a wonderful first reader, and helped me read the chapters so many times, and helped me sort of like gain the perspective of what it looks like outside of my brain. So yeah, it was just a long process. It took, maybe, I would say it took 3 pretty concentrated years, and like 2 sort of casual years, so maybe 5 years of writing and putting this together.
Wow. Do you think your process was different than maybe other authors' processes, just because of how much you were going through? While, like, some people sit out and they say, I'm going to write a book, but for you this is so personal, and there's so much grief that you're living and working through while writing it. How did that affect your writing process, or your need to get this book out there? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, it was probably more helpful than harmful. I think that I had such a sense of urgency about getting this out there, and so much of it was also just navigating and trying to understand my feelings, and what had happened, and piece together everything that I had been through, and also try to get a better sense of what the characters in the book, where they were coming from. For a lot of the book, I spent pretty angry at some of the people in this book, and that's not really an interesting thing to put out into the world. It's interesting to find both the qualities and the flaws, and what maybe make someone make bad decision, and to have compassion for all of the people, and also make sure to, you know, have a critical eye on yourself, and as the protagonist, and you know, be honest about the things that you know, made mistakes in. And so that was all really important to me. And just yeah, but I feel like that helped me in a lot of ways, because I was so obsessed with what with piecing together with what had sort of happened, that finishing it was, I think, almost easier than if I had so much room to explore, like something like fiction, you know.
Mm, yeah. Well, that's a great answer. Thank you for that insight. Um, Someone wants to know too that they realize a memoirist's own memories are the basis for this kind of book, but did you do any kind of outside research for it?
I read some books on like the history of Korean cuisine. One book that I read was just called Korean Cuisine, and I can't even see the author name from my bookshelf. But that was a book that I really enjoyed, that sort of like went into some of the historical context of food, which didn't really make it too far into it, but definitely informed a lot of the sort of things I was going to be writing about. I did take two trips to Korea. One in December of 2017, I spent 6 weeks in Seoul. And then in May, I spent 3 weeks there writing the book. And that was really informative. And some of the events that happened on these sort of trips kind of were things that were happening in real time in the book, and made their way in there. And I did talk to my father, and I did talk to my aunt a bit about some of their memories, and incorporated those as well.
Great. That's another question we have is, was it a challenge to write about? You write about people you're close to who are still living and who can read the book. Was that a challenge at all, whether it's writing about them in a good light or a bad light?
Yes and no. I honestly, it was more of a challenge to write about things that I felt my mother would not have wanted me to write about. There was a bit of like a nervousness about, you know, is this my story to tell, and what would she think of it, and would she feel ashamed of me bringing this up? But I also felt like, you know, that is kind of the role of an artist, you know, is that I had to sort of push against that. I had to, you know, and I feel like when I initially submitted some of the book, there were questions that the editor were asking you know, really required me to sort of find a graceful way to talk about some of the stuff that is incorporated in the book. And so it was about trying on like ways to not say it, ways to say it, and finding a sort of in between of, you know, divulging but not too far, in a way that makes the story make sense, but doesn't, I don't know, maybe it's handled gently.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say, was that the hardest part of writing the book, or what was the hardest part about writing the book?
um I mean, I would say the hardest part about writing a book in general is that there's just no skipping steps, you know. And I think that, you know, as someone who tends to work quickly and work on many projects, you know, I had a sort of cockiness going into it, that I was very humbled by the process of writing a book, and realized that there is really no skipping steps in the process, and that there's just, it's a lot of just doing the work and trudging through it, and, you know, just complete agony at your own sort of lack and stupidity. So I feel like the hardest part was that, certainly there were some chapters in the book that were emotionally very, very difficult for me to write. The most difficult chapter for me to write was Living and Dying, which was, when after we learned that my mother's cancer was terminal, we all went for a trip to Seoul for her to say goodbye to her family and her home country. And, you know, it just felt like it was going to be this wonderful, beautiful trip. And it just ended up so horrible. You know, we just ended up being, she got really sick. She went in septic shock. She was in a hospital for 3 weeks. It was looking like she wasn't going to make it. And reliving that experience was definitely a very difficult thing. And, you know, it was really important for me to like go into the real horror of watching someone you love's body deteriorate, and their health fail them. And you know, I wanted to go really deep into that, and I certainly had some hesitation of what was like too gross or intense to share, but ultimately I felt like that was sort of why I needed to share it, because I had never seen it before. And it was a very real thing that I went through, that I almost felt this need to let people know what it looked like. And so that was definitely a challenge, that chapter.
That totally makes sense. But I do think, yeah, I would say as someone who has not seen illness that closely, but has had like grandparents and stuff like that, like I it made me feel seen on behalf of like my mom and others who have been in that caretaker role. So I like, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Have people who've been in that caregiver position reached out since the book has been published and said like anything about their response to the book? You know?
Yeah, I've gotten a bunch of responses to the book that are you know, feel very profound and have moved me deeply. And yeah, I mean, I think that that was just like such an important, you know, important part of my life was that living that way, you know, for 6 months. And it was just really important for me to share. I received a really lovely letter from someone who actually survived cancer, and talked about how she actually felt, you know, she felt such an ache for her partner, who actually had to, you know, live with her as a partner. And she almost felt like, you know, that role is almost harder than being the patient in a way, because and I don't know if I think that she's being very generous, but I think that she was saying that, you know, like watching him feel so helpless and you know, unable to you know, find your role or whatever, uh is maybe just as challenging as being a patient in some ways. But she wrote me such a beautiful letter that I'm just butchering right now. But yeah, I've had a lot of really wonderful feedback about it. And it's been really nice.
I will say, I mean, that reaction of seeing how hard it is to be the caretaker does speak to how well you tell your own story. Because there, I mean, it sounds incredibly hard, but you handle it with, it's a very well told story. Everyone go get it. So another question we have is, we have a lot of questions. So, oh, that was what I wanted to ask though too. So we talked about the hardest part of writing the memoir. What was the most cathartic part?
Hmm. I don't know about, I don't know about cathartic, but there were certainly sections of the book that were a real joy to write. You know, a lot of my sort of childhood memories, and the first third of the book was a real joy to write. I really enjoyed writing the chapter "Where's the Wine," and just remembering my sort of teenage years, even though they were you know, some of it is a real regret for me, and I have a lot of guilt about my adolescence and sort of what I put my parents through. But um you know, I think I was able to sort of finally forgive myself for that time through writing about it. And parts of it are just so funny to, you know, it's so fun to write about yourself as a teenager, because you're just like such a character at that time. You know, you feel things so deeply, and you are just embarrassed by the most like minuscule things that, you know, your parents do. And you know, everything is devastating, and you're heartbroken all the time and jealous all the time. And you know, that sort of like propensity for feeling is just like inspiring, you know, especially like now that I'm in my 30s. I'm like, god, to like feel that much again is just sounds so simultaneously exhausting and like fun in a way. So much drama. So it was really fun to write about those years of my life, because I just haven't thought, you know, I haven't like delved into that in a long time. And just remembering like the self-seriousness that I had as like a young, you know, as a budding musician, and just obsessing over making you know, MS Paint flyers that I would hang up around town for like my Cosmic Pizza show, like was just like a real delight to like write about and remember, and you know, just see myself in this way of like these enduring qualities that I had as an adolescent, you know, like, and at the time everyone thought I was like insane, you know, because they're like, what are you doing? And one thing that's been really fun since the book came out, and I've gotten a lot more attention as an artist, was just seeing people from my high school being like, yeah, I remember when you were doing that in high school, and it's pretty great that it worked out for you, because like I think that no one really thought that it was going to, maybe, but I definitely was always like, I had a real work ethic about my creative work from a young age, and getting to write about that was, I guess, cathartic in a way, because it was also a wonderful feeling, because like in some ways it was like I showed you, you know what I mean? Because my mother also just like really never believed that, you know, she felt like it was her duty to sort of protect me from this lifestyle that was definitely not going to pan out. And then to live my life now as a writer and a musician is you know, pretty wild and pretty full circle, and it's sort of nice to look back on those moments where no one really believed you.
Right. I mean, especially when you say like people from your high school are reaching out, like, that's right, suckers. Like, but like that's very cool. And it surprises me when you said that in writing a memoir, you realized there were no shortcuts, because you don't seem like the kind of person who takes shortcuts anyway. Like, I'm going to transition into talking about Japanese breakfast. And a great question we have here from someone watching right now, thank you, is like, how did Psychopomp come into being at this time in your life? Like, you were a musician, and we see that in the book, long before you gained Jimmy Fallon level success, to use your phrase. And so, yeah, let's talk about Psychopomp.
Sure. Yeah. Before Japanese Breakfast, I was in a number of bands, but the most serious one was called Little Big League. And when my mom got sick, we were. It's pretty wild, actually. In October of 2016, the first week of October of 2016, I got married. The second week, my second album, as Little Big League, came out. And the third week, my mom passed away. So that record was definitely like, you know, the least of my concerns. And you know, just got totally, you know, I wasn't able to do like any press, not even that anyone cared about it, but you know, it just got kind of like swept under. And you know, the band like was, you know, the band wasn't doing so well. No one, you know, we were paying to play for many years, and I was 25 years old, and I had really just kind of, my mom had just passed away, and I had to take a sort of cold hard look at my life and say, you know, it's time to put this to bed. Like, it's not going to work out for you. We've worked for, you know, from 16 to 25, I was always playing in bands and playing shows, and I just felt like if it hadn't happened for me, it wasn't going to happen anymore. That being said, you know, I stayed in Eugene for 6 months after my mom died, from like October to April, or October to mid-March, and to sort of help my dad pack up the house and make sure that he was okay. And in sort of breaks from that, I would go to this little shed on the bottom of the property. My parents, you know, had 5 acres of land sort of outside in the woods of Oregon, of Eugene. And I would write about the experience. You know, I wrote this record called Psychopomp, which is the first, and I had this like, you know, stupid little side project name called Japanese Breakfast that I, you know, had been, you know, recording like crappy little demos and uploading onto the internet. And so I was like, I'll just put it out under this name. And I was writing about, you know, a lot of the same experiences that are in the book, about, you know, my dog who was confused and didn't know where her owner had gone. I wrote about my mother's wedding ring that I was wearing, and how heavy the physical weight of that was, and how heavy the psychological weight of that was. And then I recruited some friends and my husband to play on the album, and worked on it. My husband and I moved to New York, and I finished mixing and producing the record in Crown Heights for a few months. And I just thought that over the course of 10 years, I would maybe sell 500 records. And I convinced a small label to put it out, and it just blew up. And of course, it was the record that I was like explicitly said, you know, I'm not going to tour on this. I don't have any real ambition for it. And of course, that was the record that really resonated with people for some reason.
I mean, you sound like you're in disbelief about that.
Well, I think it's because, you know, it never happened for me. And I had always felt like everything I did was brilliant. And I don't know why it took so long until other people kind of felt that way, you know. And it is just like, it's a real, you know, I have so many friends who I think of as far more talented than me, that haven't found as much success as me as a musician. And, you know, there's a real lottery type element that comes with creative success. And so that is not lost on me at all. And it was, you know, it was a very lucky moment for me that record sort of took off, and then I am where I am now.
Very cool. I mean, I think it's very vulnerable, very real. So it doesn't surprise me at all that it resonates. And I know we have some Japanese breakfast listeners watching. So, yay. A few other questions about that. For instance, someone wants to know about Japanese breakfast touring plans. It's early, but you do have a new album, Jubilee. Do you want to can you talk about your albums a little bit?
Yeah, my new record, Jubilee, it comes out on June 4th. It's our third album. And we do have a tour scheduled. We have tour dates in late July and in the fall, starting in late July through the late summer and fall. And we're just hoping for the best. And it seems like they might happen. I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, they're booked and they're on our website and social media, and I hope to see you there.
Well, I will say I looked it up, and for anyone wondering, Japanese breakfast is going to be at
First
First
Ave.
Ave.
Yeah.
Is that?
We
Yeah.
played 7th Street entry maybe like 10 times. I feel like so it's a great feeling to get to finally play First Ave. I'm very excited.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's probably not the biggest laurel in the Japanese breakfast crown, but
It's a big laurel. It's certainly a big laurel. Minneapolis like has a really special place in my heart because my college bandmates live there, and so we always have a wonderful time with them. And they've, there are people. I used to be in a band called Post at Bryn Mawr, and the drummer and the keyboard player are engaged or maybe even married by now. But yeah, we used to be in like an all-girl band in college, and the two of them moved back to Minneapolis because the drummer is from there. And yeah, we used to always like crash on their floor, and so they've like seen me grow like so much. So like I feel like I always think of Minneapolis as one of those special places for me because like my old bandmates live there, and they've seen me like grow as a band, and they're very proud of me, I think, and I'm very proud of them. And yeah, I love like getting to spend time with them and hanging out in Minneapolis.
oh, that's wonderful. It totally answered the question that someone else asked about, and they acknowledge it's a very self-indulgent question, but they said, what top of mind impressions do you have in the Minneapolis scene? So that
Yeah, their band is called Strange Relations, and you should check them out. And I unfortunately don't know too much about the Minneapolis music scene beyond their band, but their band is great, and they are the music scene in Minneapolis for me. So
love it. That perfectly answered the question. Very judiciously. No, just kidding, but you had it. That's lovely of any connection to us. Other questions we have from our audience, and these are going we're going a little random now, but someone wants to know, and this is a great question I always love to ask, is what kind of books are on Japanese breakfast nightstand?
Right now, I have to be honest and say that I am not reading much, but I have so many books that I want to read. That just because I've been busy doing press and stuff, and I'm like my brain is just goop, and I have to just watch Game of Thrones for like the 12th time in order to get through the day. But there's so many great books that are coming out right now that I'm really excited to read. Two books that I loved that I read most recently was Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown, and Mega Mujumadar's A Burning. I really loved. Books that I'm really excited to read that are on my nightstand but have yet to be really cracked is My Year Abroad by Chang Rae Lee. What's the George Saunders book? A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. I love George Saunders, and I can't wait to read that book. And I have cracked this a little bit because it's pretty easy to read in passages. Is the Fran Lebowitz Reader. I've been really enjoying.
Very cool. I'm wondering, were there any memoirs or books at all, or poems, songs, whatever, that served as a guide or an inspiration when you wrote your memoir?
Absolutely. I love, because I feel like the book touches on so many different themes. And I never really read much memoir, to be honest, before writing this book. And then I read a lot of memoir. But I really love Richard Ford's Between Them, which is a memoir about his parents. I love MFK Fisher's food writing, in particular, The Gastronomical Me and Consider the Oyster. I love Anthony Bourdain's A Cook's Tour. He's just a fantastic food writer. Ruth Reichel's Tender at the Bone. I love Han Kang's The Vegetarian. Han Kang, yeah. The Vegetarian, which is explores the sort of more menacing side of food and food writing. And I feel like that was really informative to me when I was sort of writing the middle section of the book, because it was important to me to sort of express the joys of food and also the real sort of horror and terror of food, I guess, when dealing with illness and calorie counting and combating chemotherapy symptoms. So yeah, those books were all really formative. Ray Lee's Native Speaker, Alexander Chee's How to Write an Autobiographical Novel, of course Joan Didion's books about grief, Year of Magical Thinking. I reread Nabokov's Speak Memory, which is one of the most beautiful memoirs of all time. And yeah, those are some of the books that I was
Just a few.
just a few. I read a lot to prepare, and I was like, oh, this is research. It was really just maybe avoiding writing.
I think you should give yourself more credit than that. That was a beautiful bibliography of inspiration. So, what was it like for you a lot of this book, and I think we said something like this in the description, is about exploring your Korean Americanness. I'm wondering, like, what response have you gotten to the book as far as that goes? And then your identity, like all of our identities, is constantly developing. So like, where do you, what have you gained from writing this book, or how has your perspective shifted on your identity as a Korean American?
Yeah, I would say I was probably the most afraid of the American reader, because I felt like they were bound to be the medical, and I think I had some anxiety being race, that maybe my experience didn't align with anyone's, or that I was going to people were going to feel like I was trying to claim this role as some sort of cultural ambassador, and they might feel like I gotten certain things wrong. But the response is so overwhelmingly positive, and particularly from the Korean American reader. And so I'm so relieved. And I think that I just learned from that experience that everyone really comes this ownership of identity and culture in a way. And that I think that even people who are full Korean American, I've had a lot of comments, you're more Korean, from parents who are both Korean. But I was really lucky. I was really privileged to get to go to Korea every other summer. It was a huge part of my life. And I know a lot of Korean Americans that didn't get to have that experience, or Korean adoptees that don't have that same kind of bound to their culture. So I just realized everyone has these sort of questions of belonging, and that no one really feels entirely sure of their identity in a way. And I think that that's very much a part of human experience, part of the Korean American experience. And yeah, that's been a real relief, I guess.
Oh, that's a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just see. And I'm sorry if we've asked this already, but was there anything you realized while writing the memoir that surprised you? Any realizations you came to?
Yeah. I think I just developed a much better understanding of my mother, and maybe what she was going through as a young adult, in this way that I hadn't considered before. I think even in learning how to cook Korean food after she passed, I realized that my mom probably did not know how to do any of this stuff herself either, and that she also probably really struggled to learn how to make these things initially, and like how difficult it must have been for her to have been away from home. And like, especially back then, was, you know, phone calls to, you know, it's not like it was now. Like I found all of, another thing I will say that I've totally forgot until this moment, which is funny because I've done so many interviews about this book and I've totally forgotten it. People have asked me about research and stuff like that, and I'm always like, I didn't do much. But I did have all of these letters that I found and cleaning out my parents' house, and letters from my parents. And actually, the second chapter used to start with a letter to my mother, and it got revised out of it. Just too bad. That's another good thing of like, there was a really great letter that used to be in the book but didn't quite fit in, and so it got taken out. But yeah, I guess, like, you know, I realized, like, obviously phone calls were so expensive to Korea, you know, because you didn't have like Skype and like, you know, WeChat calls, and so like it would cost like, you know, an exorbitant amount of money just to talk for a few minutes. And so she didn't get to keep in, it wasn't easy for her to keep in contact with her family, and how difficult that must have been. I think so much what I realized, you know, a lot of what my aunt, my mother's older sister, talked about was she kept mentioning your mom. I think the reason why your mom was because she missed Korea, or I think she did this because she missed Korea. She wanted to come to Korea. And I was just like, I don't think she was like as obsessed with Korea as you're letting it on. Like, that's like your answer for everything. And then as I thought about it, I was like, you know, maybe it's just because she never let on to you. She never let on to me, and she never let on to my father that she was feeling homesick or that she missed her family so much, because she didn't want us to feel like she didn't want to be with us, or that to have like concern for that. So she probably withheld that from us. And then who is she going to talk to about it? And talk to her sister in Korea about it. And so all the conversations it's having is rooted in her sort of homesickness, because that's the person she calls to talk about that kind of thing. So for my aunt, what she knows about my mother is sort of totally different kind of information than what I know about my mother. And that was definitely something new that I learned about her, and really put into perspective a little bit more of like what she was going through during that time, and was like a fun part to kind of relearn and about her in a way.
Yeah, you talk about that a little bit in the book too, I think, about how you are sort of seeking out information from other people to piece together. Maybe she kept 10%, a different 10% from each.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was a very beautiful summary of what it is to know. I mean, that was unique to your mother, but also to people, and I'm sure to the challenge
Absolutely.
of writing memoir.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that was very cool. Let me see if we have another question. We have many more questions, so let me just find one. Let's see. Find a good one. Unless you have anything you want to say in the meantime while I just search. But that's totally fine. I know. Gosh, I just had one a second ago. Anyway, I do want to know what, in the book you talk a lot about how like you and your family, and especially your mother, would follow your cravings, and so maybe you'd eat something for like 3 weeks straight and then it's like on to the next thing. So my question is, what are you craving eating right now? Do you have any?
Yeah.
It can be Korean, it can be, does it have to be, you know, whatever you, yeah.
What have we been craving? What have we been eating? Noodles. I do like, this isn't a Korean thing. I've just been like, I feel like the pandemic has just brought out the monster in all of us, and I feel like eating pasta like most of the time.
I love it. It's raining here right now, and I'm guessing a lot.
Yeah, that's like great pasta weather. But yeah, I feel like I could eat pasta at any point in time. Like, not relevant to the book at all, but I do love pasta.
Not relevant, except that there are noodles on the, I mean, like,
there are noodles on the book
pastas
cover.
are a noodle.
That's
Right?
true.
I can make this a sequitur.
I did eat noodles today. I ate this type of noodle, actually.
You did?
Yeah, these are like somen noodles. I guess they're not called somen. They're called somyeon in Korean. I think in Japanese they're called somen, and they're like thin white noodles. I made something that's actually mentioned in the book called 골뱅이 무침, which is seasonal like cold noodles that you eat with beers. It's like a drinking snack.
I love it. That's awesome.
I made that for the first time today, actually. So
No way.
it turned out pretty well. I don't think I like sea snail very much, but my husband really liked
Cool.
it.
Hey, that's really fun.
It was at his request.
At his request. Well, that ties into two other questions, which is first a book question, then another food question. Did you have any like say over the cover? And if you didn't, I mean, what were your impressions when you first saw the cover?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should post the old covers or the alternative cover options at some point in time. I was really torn. The first two I thought were really bad, and I was like kind of horrified because the first one I had all these really beautiful pictures that I thought would make for really great book covers that were, you know, these sort of old my mom was like, my mom is very beautiful, and I know everyone says that about their mom, but my mom is actually, and I have my mom like could have been a model, and she had all these really beautiful photos of her from when she was younger that I thought might make a great book cover, in the same way that Psychopomp's album cover is her and her friends when they were in their 20s. And so I sent them over and some photos from my childhood, and the first one was like this depiction. It was like me with an umbrella as a child, like illustrated with like different types of food falling, and it looked kind of like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs or something. And I was like, I don't think that this is like fitting at all. Like some of the book is like really intense and very adult, and like this really like makes it look like a children's book. So that was no. There was like there's a lot of karaoke in the book, and so I think that they did like a karaoke screen that just like looked awful initially. Not to lie, no, I don't even know. I'm pretty sure it's all by the same artist, but like, you know, initially like it was. I don't know if that always happens, but the next round was, I think that this was from the second round, and it was either this or there were two. It was white, and it was a photograph of two scallions and a pair of chopsticks laid over them, and I really liked it. And it was a totally different vibe, and it was like two scallions and a pair of chopsticks, and it formed this kind of, I don't know if anyone will pick this up, but like this kind of forms like an H, you know. And so like yeah, so with the scallion ones, it was just scallions that spelled out an H and then it said Mart. But I was really nervous because I was like, I don't want people to just think it says Crying in Mart, and the title is obviously very important to me, and if someone didn't pick up that it was an H, like I didn't want people to think it was Crying in Mart. But yeah, everyone I talked to, I was like so sold on the scallions for a really long time, and then everyone I talked to was like, I think that the noodles are better. I asked a bunch of people, and then like I would say 80% of them were really into the noodles. My agent was really into the noodles, and it did feel like, and in retrospect, it feels like a more like literary, like broader book cover, and I really love it, and I'm glad we went with this. But at the time, I think I really associate scallions with Hmart more than noodles in a way. So I was unsure for a brief period of time, but I'm glad that we have this now.
Well, I'm very glad it went with one that you feel connected to instead of the cloudy one, because clearly so meaningful to you too.
Yeah.
Like,
and she's a Korean artist too, Nak Kim. She's done so many great book covers, and I was like, I really wanted her to work on the book cover, and I'm really, really glad that she got to do it. So
cool.
And did such a fantastic job.
I'm hearing from our commenters, the people watching online, that most people did in fact pick up on that it's an H. So
okay, good.
Me, and
but initially, I do think that this one used to just say Mart, and I was really worried that they wouldn't pick it up. I think that if it didn't say Mart, that they wouldn't know. But if it didn't say H Mart, that they wouldn't know. But
yeah, well, I have maybe one, maybe two questions to end on, but I'm going to ask this one last, I think, because we've had it a few times, which is just, although first I'll say someone is saying that you and your husband have an adorable looking dynamic, and it looks like you're doing like an NPR Tiny Desk concert, which is very, and I just thought you'd like knowing that.
Oh, good. He's a very nice man.
Yeah, and so someone wants to know if this book got turned into a movie, who would you pick to play you?
I answered this yesterday. I said Scarlett Johansson or Emma Stone. But you know, I don't know why people ask me that, because like I don't know of I don't know of any half Korean actresses, you know, so I think it would have to be a new young budding starlet. I don't know of any half Korean actresses out there, and I've definitely thought about it, but I don't know of any. So I would have, who are like, you know, in their would be in their like early to mid 20s to take that role. But I think that, you know, if it were to be made into a movie, we would just have to find someone new.
Well, I have to say, with the way that you seem to make your dreams come true and with how hard you work, I was picturing like, I was like, well, why couldn't she play it?
Oh God, I'm too old.
So, well,
I'm too old and I hate acting.
There we go. All right. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. I am, and I know a lot of people out there are so excited for whatever you have dreamed up next. Thank you for sharing this wonderful work with us. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And again, for those of us in the Twin Cities, September 19th, First Ave. Woo! So, all right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaylin. Thank you, Club Book.
All right, everybody. That's it for Club Book tonight. That's all we have time for. But please keep in mind, Michelle's book just launched like last week. So the fact that she made time for us to talk about crying in Hmart, which also audiobook, she reads it. So think about getting that, because I listened and it was beautiful. So,
thank you so much.
Yes, it's really a wonderful reading. So this has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, long-running literary series of MELSA, made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Washington County Library for the part they played in bringing Michelle to us. Before you log off, please look for that Club Book survey link. We would really appreciate it. It's in the comments and it's going to be projected in place of the video momentarily. Finally, consider joining us for Club Book on Thursday, May 6th for a talk with memoirist Ian Manuel. His is a name known to legal and criminal justice reform advocates. Manuel's ordeal through the Florida court and prison system is the basis for Brian Stevenson's #1 New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy. So we are going to have him virtually right here Thursday, May 6th. So join us for that. He tells the story in his own words in My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption, one of the most anticipated memoirs of 2021. This will be co-hosted by the St. Paul Public Library, and as always, it's free. Yay! So that'll be on Facebook Live. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Have a great night.